Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Howard Friedman. I'm an event director here at UBM Cannon. We're very pleased that you're here for this session. This is something that's very near and dear to the hearts of people here in California, and that's strategies for expanding California's exports. It's a really important topic, and it's something that we're very excited about presenting to you. In terms of a few housekeeping things, if you have cell phones and if you wouldn't mind silencing them, that would be terrific. There will be questions and answers at the end, so if you could hold them, there'll be a person bringing around a microphone who can make you audible. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speakers today. The person who will be leading us off is Kevin Klowden, who's the managing economist for the Milken Institute, which is a Santa Monica-based organization that does wonderful, wonderful research and lots of other great things. He's also the director for their California Center. Kevin specializes in demographics, distribution of resources, business locations, and movement of labor. He's an economist by background. He's written many, many articles, including one that really caught my attention about helping to build California exports. He coordinates the Milken Institute's Los Angeles Economy Project and has served on many advisory boards for the city of Los Angeles. Joining Kevin today are two panelists that will be having some remarks on their own and will also be involved in a panel discussion. The first one is Gunjan Bagla. He is the founder of Amritt. It's a global innovation consultancy. He comes from a manufacturing background, so manufacturing is very near and dear to his heart. He consults to many medical device and related companies and specializes in helping clients grapple with economies of India and China. He's an expert on India, China, and consults regularly to the Financial Times and the New York Times. He's spoken on the BBC, and so he's very, very well and widely known. His articles have also been featured in the Harvard Business Review, so we bring some great expertise here. Joining Kevin and Gunjan is Jack Stewart, and we're very pleased to have Jack. He's come all the way from Sacramento. He is the president of the California Manufacturers and Technology Association. The CMTA is an 85-year-old organization that's statewide. It's a nonprofit, and it's dedicated to help stimulate California's manufacturing growth and job creation. And that's so important to the economy here in California. He's been with the association for 20 years and has served as president since 1998. Is it 20 years?
I've been with the association 20 years.
Okay. 28, and he's been with the, since 98 he's been the president. He's very involved in legislation, has been doing it for a long time in Washington and Sacramento and perhaps a few other places as well. He's a native of Pennsylvania and now lives with his family in Sacramento. So to please start us off, I'd like to introduce Kevin Klowden.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Howard. Just to give you a little bit of background, the Milken Institute is a nonprofit, nonpartisan economic think tank. We're based in Santa Monica. Manufacturing has historically been one of the areas we've been most concerned about. But in particular, I'm focusing on today, and then tying it back in specifically with Gunjan and Jack's help, is the role of California's exports and the fact that California has done an absolutely wonderful job of underperforming relative to the country as a whole and to certain states in particular. And I'll discuss a little bit of why that's been the case and what California can do about it. As you can see here, going back to 1998, California showed what would be considered a solid 69% growth in exports. However, when one goes back and looks at this further and realizes in this 14-year period that the United States grew exports 150% during the same period. that Texas grew exports an impressive 236% during this period, you realize that California has lost a dramatic number of opportunities in terms of expanding exports, exports that create jobs in the state, exports that create not only jobs in terms of logistics, but also in terms of manufacturing, support facilities, and so on. What is particularly galling during this period is that California has benefited dramatically from imports coming in from Asia. We have become the greatest source, the greatest gateway for imports into the United States from Asia. We are one of the largest gateways for Latin American imports, and yet we don't turn around and send goods to the other way to the same degree. Now, in order to understand a little bit of how California has floundered in terms of exports, it's worth understanding a little bit of the history, which I will go through rather quickly. California has never had a comprehensive strategy when it's come to exports. It's had vague ideas, it's had departments that have had to coordinate exports, but what's happened is that we first got into the idea that we should promote exports in 1960. We put in foreign trades offices in London and Frankfurt. Not in Japan, not in Mexico, not anywhere nearby, but in Europe only. As soon as there was a budget crisis in 1967, the offices closed. We then revisited the idea in 1977 and created a Department of Economics and Business, which became the Department of Commerce. We even did a World Trade Commission in 1982 to promote trade. We didn't have a strategy, we just wanted to promote it. In 1983, we went ahead and said, okay, we're going to promote food and agriculture, and we have the Energy Commission to promote exports. Food and energy, I will note for the record, remain two rather significant California exports, which is somewhat ironic considering that California actually imports a tremendous amount of electricity and power even from Canada. In certain parts of the state, we actually get hydroelectric power from Canada, which is slightly inefficient. And we also, of course, import a tremendous amount of fossil fuels from elsewhere. As far as food, we should be a net exporter, but we don't, as I'll discuss, we don't take advantage of it nearly as much as we could. In 1987, we actually created two foreign trade offices in London and Tokyo. Once again, nothing in Latin America, nothing in a number of other countries. And then in 93, we consolidated everything together because we realized that having several different overlapping agencies involved with trade might have been a mistake. However, during 93 to 2003, when we were going ahead and opening up to a maximum of 15 different trade offices, we still had no strategy, we had no coordination. And as a matter of fact, in 2003, in the middle of yet another financial crisis, people considered the Technology, Trade, and Commerce Agency to be a target because it was so inefficient. It had no methodology, no mechanism for generating and producing results. It did not have any way of justifying the money it was spent, other than, of course, the idea that it was responsible for these wonderful paid vacations overseas for state legislators. In 2012, Governor Brown finally announced that we were going to once again make an effort to get involved in exports, and announced a trade office to be opened in China. In fact, two are planned, one in Shanghai, one in Beijing, but just China. We still do not have a strategy for exports. And when it comes to key elements in California, these include not only manufacturing, but agriculture, energy, refined energy products, and otherwise, having that strategy not only in terms of promoting exports, but in providing effective assistance for exports is significant. As you can see here, from 98 to 2012, California exports have been going on a roller coaster ride. We have not been very consistent in terms of our exports. The drop in 2001 and 2002 was a major hit, not only because of the dot-com crash, but also to technology manufacturing, much of which left California at that time and started moving overseas. Non-coincidentally, China joined the WTO around the same time, thus setting up a trend that has continued in many ways to this day. We recovered during the mid-2000s. A lot of ways with small and mid-sized manufacturers leading the way, who were also massively hit during the Great Recession. We saw a quick recovery that happened around 2010, 2011, but that since has petered off. Once again, the momentum we got from the recovery is no longer stopped sustaining California export growth by the end of 2012. If you compare California and Texas, which Jack will even do more eloquently after me, you will see that in 1998, in 1999 through 2000, even in 2001, California was actually the top exporting state in the country. As you can see by 2012, there is no comparison. California is at about $160 billion in exports. Texas is about $260 billion in exports. That's a $100 billion gap. That is not something that can be made up easily. Now, admittedly, in Texas's case, one of the major things that happened and has driven export growth is NAFTA. The North American Free Trade Agreement benefited Texas tremendously, but at the same time, what Texas did is that it took advantage of its geographic location and used it to promote itself both in terms of joint ventures with manufacturing, heavy manufacturing, and other elements in assembly in Mexico, in the maquiladoras, and that's also doing component manufacturing in Texas to go along with that. But it also positioned itself so that a great deal of goods are being manufactured either to be assembled in Mexico, to be exported to elsewhere in Latin America, and in particular energy products all went through Texas. California, which also has a history of exporting energy products, not just to Latin America, but even to Asia, has not been so well positioned. And in fact, a good deal of this comes from the situation that in Texas, where they'll readily approve, particularly in East Texas, new energy manufacturing refining. California has resisted any new energy refining facilities in the state for more than a decade. California exports, as you can see, showed a decline, which also happened to go on in the United States and in overall and in Texas due to the worldwide economic slowdown being led by Europe. However, while the United States and Texas stayed in a net positive in terms of growth, California did not. California exports, in particular to Mexico, saw a significant nosedive, but California exports in a number of other areas have also declined. It's declined to Japan, declined to Canada, and has shown declines to China. All of the major markets for California exports. We do not have an effective strategy to make California products the premier choice in many different areas, which means that our goods are considered more marginal and thus more likely during a period of consumer slowdown or manufacturing slowdown or otherwise to be hit. Texas, on the other hand, it's worth noting that even though it also saw a hit to Chinese exports, which in particular China saw a massive slowdown due to its being affected by Europe, which has only been somewhat captured in the data, but Chinese consumers in particular, due to pressures at home, cost pressures and otherwise, saw a slowdown and you've seen negative growth from Texas. However, despite the fact that Japan, even though it's currently in recession, has stayed relatively low, Japanese exports continued to mostly grow until the end of 2012, and exports to Mexico and Canada have stayed positive. California exports by market proportion, as you can see, Mexico remains the largest individual destination. If you combine Japan and China with the rest of Asia, that is over 40% of California exports. That is our most important market. However, that also means that Latin America, at 6% and 22% if you include Mexico, is horrifically neglected. Despite the fact that California has tremendous links to free trade locations in recently signed free trade agreement locations in Colombia and Chile. In fact, we interact with them more than Texas or anywhere else in the United States. Our net level of exports is minimal. We import significantly, in particular with Chile. That is our major source for off-season agricultural goods. In many cases, either it goes from Mexico or it comes from Chile. However, our ability to export is severely lacking. We hold no offices there. We have no comprehensive strategy. We haven't looked at the markets to determine what kind of goods there, and we provide no assistance to anywhere in Latin America, let alone in Asia. Now, it's worth noting that penetrating a market like such as China involves a number of different barriers, and we'll discuss that, but the fact remains that we do not take advantage. By industry, computer and electronic products remain the single biggest source of our exports. Transportation equipment, particularly dealing with aircraft components, remains surprisingly large. Machinery, 9%, chemicals, 8%, which is a huge opportunity for exports. Food and agriculture, despite the fact that we are arguably the most productive agricultural state in the country and one of the most productive agricultural regions in the world, is only 8%. Part of this has been because of trade agreement restrictions, although that, with the lifting of many of them with South Korea and other countries, there is a huge possibility. The fact that we are in negotiations right now with Europe for a free trade agreement creates a huge possibility. But part of the problem is that the extra value add in California exports in food comes from food manufacturing. Food manufacturing, most of which is either done in the target country or in other states, not in California, which limits our ability to capture some of that value. Exports by industry, you can see here that computer and electronics peaked during the rise of the dot-com bubble. As I noted, with the, as I'm sure everybody here is aware, the overseas location, offshoring of a lot of electronics manufacturing and related fields has significantly cut that and has seen an ongoing decline in many ways. However, it still remains by far the dominant area. Texas has taken over in petroleum products as being their big area. They also saw a hit to computer and electronics, but on a percentage basis have maintained their position much more effectively. And this is worth noting is that if you account for the massive increase in Texas exports, consumer and electronics have actually shown considerable growth. Cargo traffic in California is a considerable opportunity. California is one of the, has among the busiest cargo airports, particularly for activity to Asia. However, we've seen a significant slowdown in traffic from 2005 to 2012 in terms of cargo, particularly in the secondary airports. A lot of that is due to the fact that the high value add goods that might be going out of these airports, particularly to other countries, have declined in doing so. It's a lot more bulk goods going through California. We're not as well positioned in that regard as we used to be. Seaports, on the other hand, have generally done very well. There has been a decline in Long Beach, particularly because of the type of goods it carries, but generally from its 2007 peak, the cargo traffic has continued to do relatively well and has recovered. And the fact is that California's trade links, particularly with a number of countries having strong presences here, it would think that we'd be able to turn it around more effectively. Now, to go through quickly what we did in our study that I refer back to in expanding California exports is that we looked at some other states and how they'd done. What we found is that Massachusetts is very much like California. It had no strategy until very, very recently, at which point it finally started implementing it. And Massachusetts has continued to see a fall off, largely because even though they've discussed implementing a plan, they haven't actually implemented it yet. Meanwhile, California has continued to be in the doldrums and has been one of the lowest performing states. But states that have actually implemented strategies such as Alabama, Pennsylvania, and Florida have all dramatically outperformed California. Florida has not only done a tremendous amount of promotion, but it's also done promotion on coordinating both the state and local levels. And it's had 12 foreign trade offices and 7 in-state offices to provide assistance. Florida has actually also created an alliance to help provide assistance in terms of financing and arranging financing for exports and helping smaller and mid-sized exporters, not just larger ones. Massachusetts created a detailed international strategy and had a lot of ideas on how to implement it, many of which California could potentially take advantage of. However, Massachusetts, as I noted, hasn't really implemented those ideas yet. They've been discussed, but they haven't really taken effect. Alabama has done a tremendous amount in terms of providing coordinated assistance to specific companies, which has benefited them tremendously. They've done statewide professional trade development programs, but a number of statewide strategies for a state which historically had not been that well connected internationally. Pennsylvania, a historically declining manufacturing state, has done a great deal to actually try and assist manufacturers and various other exporters, and has done detailed goal assessments and sets targets for partners and various groups to coordinate together. Now, at this point, I would like to talk about, to turn over to Jack Stewart to talk about the importance of manufacturing in our exports and what the relation is.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you all very much. And before I start, I want to introduce the leader of Team California, who is in the audience with us today, Mary Ingersoll. Welcome. Waving to me, and all of a sudden, she does the hard job of going out and trying to recruit companies to California. And it's a challenging job, but nobody does it better than Mary Ingersoll. I want to talk today a little bit about the challenges of doing manufacturing in California and the importance of manufacturing. Manufacturing creates middle-class jobs. The average manufacturing wage in California is $74,000 a year. The average service job is $25,000 less than that. And manufacturing creates a multiplier effect on jobs. On average, for every new manufacturing job we have there are 2.5 jobs in the economy that grow out of the manufacturing. So it's very important to continue to grow manufacturing jobs and to have a policy in California and public policies that encourage manufacturing growth. And that's been one of the challenges we've had over the last decade or two. As our exports have been challenged, so has our manufacturing. Oops. First of all, Kevin had a slide on this. I put it in here as well, looking at manufacturing growth for California and Texas over the last 12 years. And as Kevin said, $251 billion from Texas and $159 billion for California. And oil is an important part, and energy is an important part of what Texas is exporting. California has a very good opportunity to do the same thing. We have huge deposits, we're now learning, huge deposits of shale oil in California. And if we develop it and develop it smartly, we can actually start increasing our energy exports as well. What has happened to manufacturing jobs in California? Since January of 2001, which was the peak for total manufacturing employment in California, we have lost about 634,000 jobs, manufacturing jobs. That's a full third of our industrial workforce is gone over that period. Now, many reasons for that. One of the reasons is because California is a high-cost state, we've had to become more productive in how we do smarter in how we do our manufacturing. We use a lot fewer people today to maintain the same output as we had years ago. On the other hand, a lot of our companies, and I hear it every day, I've been doing a lot of rounds recently in the legislature with the new members of the California Assembly and Senate. We have 39 new members in the Assembly this year, and we're taking some of my member companies along. And I had Praxair, which is an international company. They make industrial gases, mostly for manufacturing, sometimes for hospitals and others. But that company invests $1.5 billion a year in new investments around the world. And the company's various offices and various plants and sectors compete for that $1.5 billion. It's not just California competing with Texas for the money. It's really the plant in Ontario competing against the plant in Singapore to get that investment. And the bottom line is where do we get the best return on investment? And California hasn't been the place they've been getting it. So we see that kind of investment going other places. So we don't have a situation so much where we're losing jobs from California to other places, but when California companies have the opportunity to expand, they're expanding in other places. And that's the challenge we have. How do we keep our companies here and growing in California? More regulations. Well, we're good at that. I mean, the regulatory agencies have exploded in Sacramento and have been given vast power in Sacramento, and almost unchecked power as well. Just looking at what's happened to industrial manufacturing job growth in the United States coming out of the recession, this chart looks at January 2010 to the present, or through September of 2012. Nationwide, we've done a pretty good job of regrowing, and in our manufacturing renaissance, regrowing jobs, about 4.2% growth nationally. California has been pretty much flat. We haven't really done very much in manufacturing growth. And Los Angeles statistical area has actually lost another 3.3% of the manufacturing jobs over that period of time, the last 2 years. Then we took a look at, California's not doing so well. How are the other major industrial states doing? And what you see here, the states that are represented on this chart are Michigan, Washington, Indiana, Illinois, Ohio, Texas, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, California, and New York. They are the 10 states with the largest manufacturing job bases. And you can see what's happened in those states. The Midwest has really had the manufacturing renaissance, seeing states like Michigan rebound with 13% manufacturing job growth, and the state of Washington as well with 11.3%, Indiana with 10.5%, and again, California has actually lost 0.3% of our industrial workforce over that same period of time. We went back and took a longer look at this, looking back to 1977 at where industrial investment has gone. And there's an organization, Conway Data, in Atlanta that tracks all industrial investments by year. And they also look at the investment amount. They look at expansions and startups. And over the 35-year period that this chart represents, from 1977 to 2000, we did fairly good. As you can see, each column represents a year, and the numbers on there are the percentage of industrial investments that came to California, the percent of the U.S. industrial investments that came to California. And you can see we did pretty well in the 80s. You can see we went up to 17% in the mid-80s. That was when Reagan did the big defense build-up, and California benefited dramatically from that. And then in the late 90s, we had the tech build-up that occurred again. So California did very well on both of those. But since 2000, we have done very, very poorly on industrial expansion and growth. We've only been getting 1.9% of the investments, the manufacturing startups and expansions nationwide. And compare that, I have a slide here in a minute, but we're 12.6% of the national economy. So, if you talk about fair share, we're far from getting our fair share of industrial investments. We're still 12.6% of the national economy, yeah. Actually, in 2002, we were the 5th largest economy, and we're down to the 8th largest economy now, 8th or 9th. We might be 9th now. We were 5th at one point. It has a lot to do with the value of the dollar, that's right. It also it's good for rhetorical purposes as well. And what this chart shows, each column is a state, and showing what the dollar investment per capita industrial investment is per state. So you take the total dollar investment of manufacturers of the industrial sector and divide it by population. So you get a number, how many dollars per million is invested in each state on the industrial side of the economy. The average nationally is, this is from 2007 to 2011, the average is $2,000 per capita. In California, it's $325 per capita. So in manufacturing, the investment is obviously going in other places, just looking at it in a different light here. And again, bring this all together again. The tall column there shows California 12.6% of the national economy. That's our share of the GDP. And again, our startups and expansions are 2.2%. And I think really the one that gets me the most is California's share of national manufacturing expansions is only 0.5%. Very, very anemic. Costs will increase and it will get worse. It can get worse. Already high workers' compensation costs in California. Are there manufacturers here? Do we have manufacturers in the room? One. So talking to you then. The lack of a manufacturing sales tax exemption. California is one of only 3 states that applies sales and use tax to capital equipment purchased for manufacturing. So when you buy that equipment in California, a California manufacturer buys the equipment, it's going to cost you 8 or 9% more, a premium to be in California because you have to pay sales tax on it, where in the other states, the sales tax is not applied to that kind of capital investment. And it's especially hard hitting on a small company that's starting up when it's buying its first round of equipment, and you have to add 10% in California. And that's borne out by another fact. I don't have the slide in here today, but we look at venture capital investment versus actual startups and expansions, these numbers I'm talking about. California gets about half of all venture capital investment. We create great innovations, great new products, but what happens is we do the innovation here, which is wonderful. I'm not negative on that at all, because it's good to keep that here and keep those innovation centers moving. But the fact is once a company is ready to go to scale and produce a product, they look someplace else to do the manufacturing, and then when it's marketing time, they market back to California. So we get a few jobs, a few high-end jobs in the R&D side, but what we miss is the broad number of manufacturing middle-class jobs when in production. We have electricity rates are very high right now. Our industrial electric rates are 50% higher than the average of the rest of the nation. And with Prop 32, the cap and trade, and the renewable portfolio standard that California has, the utilities are projecting that our energy costs, electricity costs, will double in the next 10 years. That's what we have to look forward to. And then overall, we are a higher tax burden in California than other states. Coming increases is some of the climate policies. As I said, RPS, renewable portfolio standard, and cap and trade are going to have a direct impact on the cost of both transportation fuels, electricity, and natural gas. The cap and trade auction stands to put a lot of new costs on manufacturers. When manufacturers now have to go out and buy credits to emit carbon, that becomes a cost of doing business, a cost that California has and nobody else has. I don't know if any of you are aware that California now has a green chemistry law where companies will have to justify the chemicals that go into their products, do an analysis, prove that they're safe, and then if they're not safe, they have to do an alternatives analysis. If they can't find an alternative, they may be banned from manufacturing that product or even selling that product into California. Those regulations are not implemented yet. They're in there right now. I think it's the 9th round of proposed regulations that have been released, but it's going to be a huge challenge for California manufacturers. Unemployment insurance taxes are sure to go up. Through the recession, California borrowed $10.3 billion from the federal government to pay unemployment insurance, and that all has to be paid back with interest. So the only way to get that is out of the employers who pay the unemployment insurance tax. The healthcare mandate, we're still trying to weed out what this is actually going to mean for California as opposed to the other states, but we know our healthcare costs have been going up and will continue to go up. And then last year we had the mandatory single sales factor versus single sales factor. I won't really get into describing that, but it is a challenge for companies from out of state to do business in California. It taxes them at a higher rate. Prepare like other states. As Kevin said, California has lacked a comprehensive export strategy. We've lacked a comprehensive economic development strategy. I feel strongly that the governor's office and the new GoBiz office, under the leadership of Mike Rossi and Kish Rojan, they are working on this, and I think and I believe they are going to do a good job in reposition California, both for exports and for economic development. I don't know if you've seen it, Kevin, but the governor's going to lead a trade mission to China in April, so that's very positive on that part. But California, we are constantly on the defensive from other states. I think the trip from, if you've all paid attention to the news this week, Governor Perry was in California this week, and he's put a bright yellow line in the sign, challenging California. As I look at it, it's really a challenge. And I do think that there's been a lot of conversation developed out of that, and I think the conversation has been positive. It's put light on our economic climate here. I think the legislature and the governor are willing now to start looking at some of those issues and start working on them. I'll get to those later, but there are a lot of issues, a lot of things we can change that would make the climate better in California. And if there are manufacturers, I'd love to talk to you, get your card, so you can put you at least in our mailing system, so you can alert you to the challenges and some of the legislation, so you can weigh in on it from time to time with your legislators. One of the things that we need to do is we need to talk to those legislators. They get tired of hearing from me and my lobbyists in Sacramento. What they want to do is hear from you, and it makes a whole lot of difference when you walk into their district office and talk to them versus me going into their offices in Sacramento. Our issues this year, enterprise zones. Enterprise zones are zones in the state that the governor and the legislature would like to eliminate. They give tax advantages for hiring credits and investment credits. The cap and trade auction puts, as I said, enormous new costs. It will be up to up to 10 to 17 billion dollars in new costs per year by 2020 on manufacturers for buying credits for carbon. CEQA reform, that's our environmental law. That's also under discussion right now. The sales tax exemption, as I mentioned earlier, green chemistry, and finally career and technical education, something that we need to reinvigorate in California. So we're preparing a pipeline of new workers, and not, the factory floor, it's not the factory floor that my generation saw, the baby boomers. It's a whole new factory floor. It's a whole new level of skills that California workers need to learn, and we need to pay attention to that and put those people into the kind of courses and kind of training programs that are really going to provide the kind of workforce we need in California for 21st century manufacturing. And finally, if you're interested in some of these issues, we'd love to talk to you about it, and we'd love to make you part of our coalition and working with the governor and the legislature. Thank you very much. And now, I turn it over to... She said, I don't know about that. She may have retired. Gunjan, Bagla.
Yeah. Thank you.
There you go. Here's
Okay. Thanks. Well, if some of you are feeling depressed by now, I'll try to cheer you up a little bit. So I came to California as a young person getting involved in manufacturing in Culver City. And one of my first and most uplifting experiences was that the company I was working for had experienced about a 20-25% increase in orders, and they were getting ready to start to outsource the manufacturing to a low-cost location. And I talked with my boss, and I said, let's see if we can put in a little bit of automation and keep some of the work right here on our factory floor in Culver City, which is about the most absurd place to think about a manufacturing facility. But it turned out that I worked with not Rosie, but a woman named Gloria, who was a Polish immigrant who barely spoke any English. But we sat down and worked together, and we programmed this machine called the Rayonic component locator. And within a couple of days, they told me she was unskilled and whatever, but she was a smart person, and within a couple of days, she was able to do the basic programming of that machine so that we could start stuffing components 3 or 4 times faster than we used to. Long story short, that whole process grew into a point where we could essentially keep those manufacturing jobs right in Culver City at that time and be able to grow the force and actually produce at a much lower cost than we used to. This was some years ago. But fast forward to today, what I'm going to talk to you about, the subject of my talk, is how to help improve exports of medical devices into India. Okay. Some of the companies listed at the bottom of this slide are the types of clients that we have worked with, but we work across many different industries. So I just have one slide in my presentation, and so let me talk a little bit about India. How many of you are currently doing business in India? Okay, so just a few of you, maybe about 20% or less. India is an interesting market and economy today, I think, because it's soon going to be $2 trillion. And you might know that President Obama visited India about 2 years ago. His primary mission to go to India, one of the two primary goals was relative to improving exports of American goods into India. India is already buying a tremendous amount of food product. One of our clients is the largest grower of pistachios in the world, and they grow the pistachios in the San Joaquin Valley, and we get them exported and sold into India. They're buying a lot of defense equipment, which is a huge market for American companies. But I'm going to try and focus my attention more on medical devices and the underlying factors that drive those. So today, a large number of companies are selling both new and used medical devices into India. The presence of American companies in particular has actually stimulated the growth of Indian companies and creating new ideas and new products to address the lower cost segment of the market that historically American companies have not been able to address. Okay? But there's a nice synergy going on today as people are leaving General Electric's R&D facility in Bangalore to start a company of their own, or leaving Philips or Siemens and starting a company of their own. And very soon, some of those companies will become great acquisition targets for California and American companies to be able to really create a larger ecosystem for products that can be sold worldwide. Okay. the factors that are driving the growth in India today really have to do with the fundamental demographics of India. In 1991, the country began to liberalize, and today the medical device market is only about $3, $4, or $5 billion, depending on whom you speak to. Milken should probably do a study in India to get more accurate numbers.
You want to fund it?
Sure. Yeah, the driving factors are the rise of the middle class in India. Today, there's probably about 80 million people in India who live a life similar to the American middle class. That number, by most measures, is going to go to 500 million over the next 15 years. But not only that average income is growing every year. So you have the compounding effect of incomes increasing as well as the size of the middle class increasing. Okay? And these are not hypothetical or fictitious numbers. We already see these trends happening. Say, for example, in the number of cell phones. 10 years ago, India had 1 million cell phones. Today, it has 900 million cell phones. And at least 600 million people of those 900 million are people who have no other device of any kind. No radio, no computer, no television. The primary device is a cell phone that's almost as good as the one that you and I have. Okay? I gave a talk earlier today where I talked about the cell phone being a medical device. Okay? Think about that for a minute. Okay? When you put a device like that in the hands of somebody who earns $2 a day, there's potential to use it as a medical device. And if you can operate in that domain, you can actually bring products and services into the Indian consumer in a way that really hasn't been done so far. India is the country that has more diabetics than any country in the world. And we've done a number of studies for our Western clients on how to start to take, to leverage that market. Diseases that have been long gone in much of the rest of the world, such as tuberculosis and malaria, are present in significant numbers in India. And so companies are designing new devices in the United States and manufacturing them here to be able to take them there and address this market in a more effective manner than has been done today. Okay? And finally, today, if you are a medical consumer in India and you get sick, chances are you are paying out of your own pocket for any medical treatment, and we all know that limits the ability for people to spend. That is starting to change because companies are starting to offer plans. Insurance is growing, and the government has committed to doubling the amount of expenditure on medical services from about 1 point something percent to about 2.5% of GDP. So all of those factors are going to cause this perfect storm in India, where I think if I come 3 years from now, 5 years from now, and ask how many of you are doing business in India, I think I'll see most of your hands go up. So it's a huge, huge market that I think you should take advantage of. The other factor to keep in mind is that the Indian government's policies, curiously today, actually discourage the growth of local companies. If you are a company in India and you want to build a medical device and you have one component that you're importing, hopefully from California, putting it into that device, that component attracts a duty, okay, of anywhere from 20 to 30%. Okay. However, if you import the complete device from California, there's no duty at all, as long as it's a medical device. Okay. So this is something, of course, the local companies are fighting against, and sooner or later, the government will listen to them. So this right now is actually a good time for people to get in and establish a footprint and get a market before these regulations start to change. So I'm going to stop there, and I'll be delighted to take questions later on. Thank you very much.
I'm going to go ahead and actually, maybe we could just do it from down here. It'd be a little more intimate. I'm going to ask a couple quick questions to Gunjan and Jack, and then we're going to allow time for a few questions from the audience. First, I think, Jack, one really important element is that what are one or two things California could do to quickly improve its industrial investment climate? The numbers were terrifyingly low recently in terms of the amount of investment.
They are, and the two things that are on the table that are possible, I think, this year is one is our regulatory reform, the CEQA law reform, and the ability to get quickly through that process. And again, using the Texas comparison, you can get a permit in Texas in a number of weeks. In California, it takes at least 2 years. And if you get challenged, there's no finality to our process. It can be challenged over and over again. It can take sometimes 4, 6, or 8 years to actually get your final approval, and sometimes companies just back away from it after so long. And the challenges don't necessarily come from the environmental community. They sometimes come from NIMBY people, not in my backyard folks, who don't want a plant near them. It comes from labor, who want to make sure that the plant is unionized once it's built. It comes from competitors who lost the bid to build the plant or build the building. So it's a very challenging law, and there's a lot of pressure in Sacramento to do something about it this year. And the other thing is what, I'll call it simply the factory tax, the sales tax exemption on manufacturing equipment that adds so much to the cost of investment in California. So I think reform our environmental regulation, our big one, CEQA, and also do the factory tax.
Got it. And which, given the fact that we want to sell manufactured goods overseas, one question I've got actually direct to both of you is that if California established a trade mission in India, would it provide a real opportunity for selling and promoting manufactured goods there?
Yes, absolutely. I think so. I talked to you about our pistachio client, Paramount Farms, and when we took them to India, we did the bulk of the work to make it happen. But the U.S. Department of Agriculture has an active team there, okay, and they really knew what they were doing. I was a little, hesitant to use their help at first because I wasn't sure what value they would provide, but they were extremely forthcoming. They were very complimentary to the work that we did, so we didn't have to duplicate much of their effort. And I think if California were to establish an office, in India, I think it would be a dramatic advantage to local companies. We have tremendous medical device companies both in the Bay Area and here in Southern California, and I think they need that push to be able to have that visibility.
Jack?
Yeah. I completely agree. We need to have the visibility. We need to have a strategy to go about that. I mean, companies do their own marketing, but the state can help an awful lot with the trade office and with a targeted sales, a trade mission to India.
Now, we mentioned medical devices. That brings up what kind of manufactured goods does California retain a competitive advantage in terms of exports? What are the things that we make still here that are in demand in some place like India or in China or elsewhere?
So I think products that have a high value add, high ticket price typically, and products that can readily be shipped by air, I think are very, it makes perfect sense to manufacture them in California and ship them worldwide. India is about as far as you can go before you start coming closer, right? Yeah. It's 12 and a half hours away. So transportation costs can be an issue, just getting goods in and out can be an issue. But if you have, many medical devices are very high value. You can get a lot into a small box. And so those types of products, I think it makes tremendous sense. The other area where I think it makes sense is where there is a high degree of intellectual property. Because those are the areas where we find in many cases our clients are quite reluctant to put any manufacturing at all in China. Mm-hmm. Okay? However, India doesn't have some of those same issues. So often you can do a combination where much of the manufacturing is happening in California and some final value add is happening in India, and then you use that as a base to sell to the entire region, not just to India's small market.
I would just add to that, California has a huge opportunity to develop energy as an export, and I think that's something that we ought to be focusing on as well. And there is a lot of discussion in Sacramento right now about how we're going to develop energy in our natural resources in the very near future, with fracking going on in Pennsylvania and Texas and North Dakota. California has the reserves. It can be done safely. We just have to get over this hump and get the regulations written and get permission to do that. And I think we can see, we could really see a huge energy boom in California if we develop what we have here.
And it's worth noting that it doesn't even have to be the raw products. It's really the refined products that are the big deal. And the fact is that the capacity for refined energy products is severely short of the demand in places such as China and India. And we have a real opportunity to export into those markets, especially as their middle class grows. Now, one last question that I want to just throw out before we open it up is, The if somebody is going to take is already involved in exports, could they take what they know from one country, such as China or Latin America, and apply it to another country like South Korea or India? Is it how much can you have a similar strategy, and how much do you need to be able to localize it in terms of what the demand is?
I really don't know the answer to that.
Yeah,
But I would guess there is a difference, and you have to learn the trade laws, the regulations that the various companies have. Countries have. I would just think that there is but there are companies that do very well in exports. I mean, I have a small manufacturer who manufactures plastic products for kinds of plastic products used in medical to guard the surgeon from splatters from the patient, the kind of plastic you use in masks for the military. He's out in Temecula, he has developed a worldwide market for his products. It's a kind of a low-tech product, but he's figured out how you do exports and what has to be done and how you have to do it and how you have to individualize it by country. And he does a very good job.
Yeah. So in all the consulting that we do in helping people become successful in India, the one consistent message over the last 5 to 7 years that we have seen is that the biggest mistake that American companies make is that they think India is China 2.0. Right? I've figured out how to sell into Shanghai and Beijing, and let me apply what I learned there in India. It just doesn't work. It's good if your competitors are doing that, but it's not good for you to do that. For example, I mentioned earlier, the respect for intellectual property is very different between the two countries, right? But let me give you something else. Both the US and India are free market democracies, right? China is not, okay? This is both good and bad, right? So if your product has a problem in India, it'll be on the front pages of the newspapers, it'll be on Twitter, it'll be all over the place in no time at all. Just last week I read McDonald's had to pay 15,000 rupees because somebody got a meat burger instead of a veggie burger. Now 15,000 rupees is not a lot of money, but the story was carried on the front pages of the newspapers, right? And that can be an embarrassment. Generally that way, if you keep the Chinese government happy, it's not going to happen in China, right? So it's a different environment, different market that you have to be aware of. The other big difference, I think, for medical device companies going to India is that India is not just a market. It is also a place where you can utilize highly trained talent to develop next generation medical devices collaboratively. Okay. Generally speaking, we find that med device companies are much more eager to want to do that in India than any other country. GE has 5,000 people in India, Siemens, Philips, our own client, Covidian, has set up an R&D center in Hyderabad. And those opportunities, I think, are much more compelling to do this in India for a global market.
Okay. Now, we have time for a couple questions from the audience. Does anybody have one?
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, okay. Hi, I'm Shawn Boyce, by the way.
Yep.
American Industrial. And
Mike is coming.
Oh, there's a mic. Hi. Okay. Well, good afternoon. My name is Shawn Boyce from American Industrial, also Solution Vehicles. I originally come from Boeing, okay, as a manager there, and also with Northrop, and also with Honeywell, and PPG. So, anyway, I've managed all those companies that are leaving here, except for Honeywell and Northrop. But anyway, my one concern was, are you guys doing the free trades? Because I know we were doing an American free trade with South Korea, and I was pushing that. Do we have something in South Korea with California?
Nothing that I know
Yeah.
of. Nothing.
Okay,
that I know of.
that's a huge market. Now on your concern with it, because I'm used to seeing things with India, I actually took a director position with HCL, which is a $5 billion India company, but I was doing the aerospace side for America, for ITAR, because that's what I do, right? But being from Honeywell, and also what I've noticed about India, the only caveat I'd have with that is some of their materials, they do sneak in some very degraded, bad materials. We've had some bearings that failed because they had substandard material sciences to them. Also, when it comes to trade with India, at least in aerospace, you have to do sharing with them, okay, which means you have to do offloading to them. Okay, that's just a standard. So they want to take over all the stuff that's really high tech, right? But we don't give it to them. We give them the simple structure stuff. So that's the concern with India. I've seen even worse with China, because they're like family members that build everything over there, okay? Then the other thing was, sorry, I'm going to ask three questions. This one is, now if we did become energy, would we have to increase our refinement capability, and would we have to make them to the new regulations, or would we build them to the old grandfather clause sites? Now, with our regulations in California, we kill ourselves. I mean,
You're right. The last new refinery that was built in California was in 1960. It's the Benicia, originally the Exxon refinery. That's now, I believe, it's Valero now. But
right, that's huge. I've
huge.
flown
It's
over
huge,
it. Yeah,
yes.
it's huge.
And that's what the refineries have done. They've expanded their output, but they have not been able to build a new.
Are they maxed at their volume, or would we have to build more?
Well,
to
I mean, it would certainly be beneficial if we started producing petroleum in this state, crude. I would believe that we'd want to increase our.
We'd increase our
refining. I mean,
capacity.
that would be the best of both
So
worlds.
we're running at like 70% volume to capacity right now?
I don't know what the number.
There is a disruption also, the fact that you've got the problems that with the Chevron Richmond plant, and that's certainly hit capacity. Obviously, our gas prices are affected, but the fact is that one of the issues there is that they needed to get local approval for upgrades they wanted to do, which would have increased their ability not only for local sales, but also for exports. And that when redoing facilities, even if you can get through the permits, you still have to get through the local resistance, which can often be significant.
And that's what's stopping in addition to the fire at Richmond, the Chevron Richmond, they've also been trying to do an expansion there and an upgrade, and they've been stymied by the local community.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So let me just address the India portion of your question. So
Sorry.
I see you're from Long Beach, and the Boeing Long Beach facility that manufactures the C-17 would have been shut down today if it were not for a $4 billion order from the Indian Air Force. At the end of that order, at the end of that shipment, India is going to be the largest operator of C-17s outside of the U.S. Air Force.
Yep.
Okay. So good California jobs right here being funded by the Indian taxpayer. In the medical device business, there are no limitations for 100% foreign equity. You don't have to share your IP. You can manufacture the product anywhere in the world and bring it into India. So it's wide open for the people in this audience.
Thank you.
My name is Joshua Wong. I spend half of my time in California and the other half of my time in Hong Kong. And I just saw that the governor is going to take a delegate to China. I'd like to know from the panel, as far as you know, what would he be trying to do? And from your point of view, what do you think he should be trying to do? Thank you.
The normal procedure is that it's supposed to be two things. It's supposed to be promotional and it's supposed to be fact-finding. That meeting with local partners, meeting with people who might be local distributors. A lot of it is really just to promote. What it does is it gives an opportunity to promote the state as a trade partner, as a specific location for things, and also ideally to promote California goods in particular. If he was really, my argument is that if he's going to really be making a difference, is that he should be be getting an understanding from the meetings of what it actually takes for California to have better penetration of the Chinese market and to be able to sell goods better in China, and what steps need to be taken by California to be more competitive. That's the biggest thing he needs to be able to do. The promotion is great, but the promotion needs to continue once he's gone.
Yes, and that's the value of having the offices in China as well. He goes over there and does the high-level visibility, PR work, and then they go in and do the grunt work. Yes, sir.
What? That you'd have to talk to them on. Yeah, I'll send them a PDF that they'll have available on the website.
I have some copies of mine if you like it.
Yeah,
Give you-
and you can also, if you can get our business card,
Yeah.
and you can ask me, and we can do it that as well.
So just to add to that, my company is actually going to produce a white paper on the Indian medical device market in about a month. So if anybody wants, leave me your business card and we can get that to you.
All right. If we don't have any other questions, just would like, we got one more? Yeah, okay.
Hello, my name is Doug, and I have one little itty-bitty question on here, and that is to the standard of living based upon the NAFTA, CAFTA, and all the other FTAs. Basically, what we've done is we've given away our economic advantage and lowered the overall income of the U.S., and we've used the maquiladoras to pollute the Mexican soil. Is that what you are proposing to do to California?
Absolutely not. I mean, we have the strongest environmental regulations in the world here. We're not.
Yet you oppose them.
What?
And you say that they have to
No,
be
no, no,
weakened.
no. I'm not opposing them. I'm saying we have to streamline. We have to make them easier to apply to comply with. For somebody that's going to invest in California, if it's an unending process, you're going to quickly lose interest in investments. What you need is a process that protects the environment, and once the process is done, it's over. That it can't be challenged again and again and again. And I have the confidence. I mean, I work with the regulatory agencies in Sacramento. They're not going to be signing off on environmental projects that are going to harm the environment. We are probably the cleanest manufacturing in the world right now, and the purpose is not to make California a dirtier place. It's to make it easier to comply with the regulations we have.
Just as to interject, it's one of the common misperceptions that runs into with CEQA reform. It's not elimination. There are groups who'd love to see it eliminated, don't get me wrong. But that would never, ever happen, quite honestly. I mean, there's just no environment for that. What you have right now is a situation where even environmental projects, including brownfield site reclamations, solar power, wind power sites, attempts at cleaning, often even at cleaning sites up or providing new uses, run into CEQA regulation and other regulatory issues. Quite often you run into a situation where it's much easier to develop a greenfield site than to reuse a brownfield site, which is far, far better for the environment and for cities because of regulatory concerns. That's what you're talking about. And in many cases, we're fixing a number of very poor decisions that weren't, it's not even talking about that CEQA going back to the late 60s, early 70s. We're talking about decisions in a regulatory standpoint that in some cases go back to the 20s and 30s. Anyway, at this point, we're out of time. So I'd like to thank fellow panelists and you for attending.